The views and opinions expressed on this program are those of the guests appearing on the program and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of 8 News Now or Nexstar Media Group.
With these protests, which are leading to riots, one tragedy is only leading to another.
Tonight on Politics Now, Black Lives Matter protests. Peaceful rallies give way to clashes in the shooting of a Metro police officer. We hear more from Sheriff Joe Lombardo. Plus,
we're going to be conscientious in our decision-making process as to whether we should file charges.
District Attorney Steve Wolfson tells us how those arrested during protests will be prosecuted. And Tuesday is primary day, what you need to know about this election.
From 8 News Now, this is Politics Now.
And we do start with the June primary election, which is just a few days away. Thank you for joining us. I'm John Langler. If you have not sent in your mail ballot just yet, it needs to be postmarked by Tuesday, June 9th. There are 30 ballot drop-off locations across Clark County, and drop-off locations open this weekend and on Monday as well. On Election Day, there will be 3 in-person locations for voting. That'll partially be done to allow same-day registration. Now, at those in-person locations, the setup will be different than what you might be used to. There are no voting machines. Election workers will print out your mail-in ballot and hand it to you. Then you fill it out, you sign it, and you hand it right back. There is a separate area set up for same-day registration. That will also be they will also hand the paper to you, and then you hand it back, and that's how it's set up. If you're registered on Election Day, you do need identification. This is all because of the coronavirus, of course. For more than a week, people have flooded the streets of the cities of the United States. They are protesting the death of George Floyd, an unarmed black man who died in the custody of Minneapolis police. Here in Las Vegas, near nightly protests organized by Black Lives Matter have started out peaceful. Thousands have marched in downtown Las Vegas and on the Las Vegas Strip. Despite the strong desire for those protests to stay peaceful, there were some instances of vandalism, tear gas being used, and arrests. Law enforcement says outsiders are causing this violence, and that includes the shooting of Metro Police Officer Shea Michelonis earlier this week. Right now, he is on life support.
This is a sad night for LVMPD family and a tragic night for our community. With these protests, which are leading to riots, one tragedy is only leading to another.
Officer Michelonis was shot during that protest outside of Circus Monday night. Fellow officers, public officials, and community members are still supporting him. Michelonis has been on the Metro Police Force for 4 years. His parents and brother are Metro officers as well. The I-Team's Vanessa Murphy asked Clark County District Attorney Steve Wolfson about how protesters arrested for vandalism will be prosecuted.
Everybody supports a citizen's right to express themselves, their right to assemble, their right to protest. We encourage it. It's good. It's a good thing to have the ability to express oneself. This is not a perfect society we live in, and this freedom of expression, if done within the bounds of the law, if done peacefully, can help us all to understand and make improvements. However, there's a line, and when a person crosses over from a peaceful expression into violence, whether it be throwing rocks, throwing bottles, shooting guns, or otherwise breaking the law, we have to enforce that law, and that's what we do. So those cases will be reviewed on a case-by-case basis. The misdemeanor cases, the vast majority, if not all of them, are out of custody, and we have court return dates in about 60 days. So we're going to be conscientious in our decision-making process as to whether we should file charges and what charges should be filed and against whom.
There have been several hundred arrests made during the protests in Las Vegas. Nevada Governor Steve Sisolak showed support for the peaceful protests on his YouTube page.
But as you protest, know that I see you and I'm listening. Please be safe out there. To our law enforcement officers, I ask that you be patient, compassionate, and sympathetic with our fellow Nevadans.
Governor Sisolak went on to say he's going to hold meaningful conversations over the upcoming months with lawmakers. And he also said he looks forward to signing legislation next session based on the outcome with some of those discussions with the community as well. Assembly Speaker Jason Frierson also said lawmakers would look at de-escalation, implicit bias training, and other similar policies for law enforcement. Now, the protests nationwide have centered around police use of force, specifically against the African American community. Earlier this week, I spoke with UNLV Assistant Professor of African American Studies, Tyler Perry. We discussed pent-up frustration in the African American community and what he thinks change would look like.
Another difference, and I don't know if this is indicative of the actual case of Mr. Floyd or if it's a sign of a change in the community, is seeing in some cities law enforcement joining the protest, kneeling with them, coming out against the police actions in Minneapolis. Is that a broader sign that there is change taking place, or is that specific because the video is so obvious?
Yeah, I mean, there's probably multiple conclusions one could come to, and I think maybe a few things can be true at the same time. I mean, on the one hand, if you look at the tweets from various protesters and try to peel back the many thousands that have come across, is that they've suggested that the police did kneel initially, but then they did start dispersing the crowd in what was interpreted as a violent manner. And so my opinion here is that I think that there are probably many police officers that are sympathetic, if not overtly supportive, of the actual protests, but they are trapped within a system that's predicated upon, I guess, brotherhood or a fraternity, that you have to support police officers, your fellow police officers, before anyone else. And so it makes them difficult to actually support it consistently. I mean, you might kneel for an hour, but then you are arresting or beating people up who you see or you interpret as causing a disturbance.
Is there a frustration in the African American community that nothing's changed? Or have things changed and this, have things changed and this is an outlier?
Okay, so I would say that the frustration stems from the fact that change only appears to have happened in the LVMPD to the extent that it has because people had leveled complaints against it. I mean, if people had been silent and just allowed police to continually brutalize them, then the police would have just kept doing it. And this was pretty consistent throughout the 1990s and into the early 2000s. It seems that the significant change, I mean, I'm from here, I'm from Las Vegas originally, and I'm old enough to remember when Stanley Gibson was murdered, essentially in the parking lot, Gulf War veteran, African-American man who had mental health issues. And essentially with an AR-15 he was gunned down. And it took that for a lot of the investigations to really commence. And so the frustration is why does it take black trauma and murder to get people to wake up to the problems of police brutality?
There's more of that interview at 8newsnow.com, and we're going to have more on what is happening in Congress to tackle police use of force issues a little bit later on in the program. The other big news in Las Vegas this week, casinos are now open for business. That's statewide. At the stroke of midnight on Thursday, gambling reopened.
3, 2, 1.
So that was the scene at the D on Fremont Street, marking the end of 2.5 months of closure designed to try and stop the spread of the coronavirus. What you see there, bartenders, go-go dancers are wearing face shields and masks. Inside, though, it appeared a lot of people kind of forgot about social distancing.
It's a reopening of life.
Like New Year's, but hotter.
It's kind of a strange time, right? Everything's shut down, and we wanted to come and support all the local people that make the economy so strong.
The casinos themselves have plenty of social distancing rules and regulations in place, including employees having to wear masks and personal protective equipment to protect themselves. Many strip casinos opened later on Thursday morning. Visitors over at the Bellagio welcomed with a standing ovation, applause, and cheers. While some guests just checked right in, others went straight to the casino floor. Resorts are limiting the number of people that can be at the table games. The slot machines are also separated for social distancing.
It's a little dead, but hopefully this weekend I pick up.
We've booked, I think, 3 times trying to be here for the reopening, and obviously it got postponed each time, so we're happy to actually be here.
Now, on that first day, Thursday, the sidewalks weren't particularly busy during the day. Some people were strolling by the Bellagio fountains, though, just to see it. As the resorts reopen, Nevada is grappling not only with the coronavirus, but also the highest unemployment in the nation. Take a look at this here. Las Vegas has the highest unemployment rate of any metropolitan area in the country, 33.5% for April. Second place, Detroit, that metropolitan area, 24%. Cleveland, 23% unemployment. Preparing for an all-mail-in primary. Coming up next on Politics Now, we'll break down what Election Day will look like and take a look at how turnout has been so far. And polling Americans' attitudes about the George Floyd case and race relations in America.
Welcome back to Politics Now.
All right, let's talk about Tuesday's upcoming election. More than 250,000 Nevadans have already voted in the June 9th primary. Though through Wednesday, 276,456 Nevadans returned their mail-in ballots. You can see the numbers here on your screen. 636 people voted in person. That puts turnout at about 17% of active registered voters. That seems like it's pretty much on track or on par with other years recently so far compared with the previous couple of elections. Now, because of the different nature, though, it's hard to tell for sure. But the turnout was 23% in 2018, as you see right there, and 19% in 2016. Both of those elections had Senate or governor races in them as well, which is why it's a little different than now. So far, 43% of the people who have taken part in this election are registered Democrats. 41% are registered Republicans. Now, the Republican numbers are bolstered by turnout higher than 30% in 4 rural counties. Clark County has had turnout at about 15%. You can see the numbers here on your screen. Democrats have an advantage, though. Of the more than 156,000 ballots returned in Clark County, 76,000 or so are Democrats, 54,000 registered Republican voters in the primary. The Republican National Committee has sued Clark County for public records, showing how it reached to deal with Democrats over this mail-in primary election. Clark County made 2 concessions after Democrats sued them. They would open 2 more same-day voter locations for a total of 2, and they would also mail ballots to the 200,000 inactive registered voters. Republicans call this a shady backroom deal. Democrats also have a pending lawsuit Neither one of those will put a stop to the primary election, however. On Tuesday, we're going to have complete coverage of Election Day all day long. We'll have special coverage at 7 o'clock online at 8newsnow.com and at 8 o'clock right here on Channel 8. We'll break down the early numbers. However, Clark County is doing one number dump, so we're not going to have the final numbers actually until June 16th. Debating police reform.
This injustice is not the case of a few bad cops, but a broken police system.
Next on Politics Now, the bills being proposed in Congress right now. And our own Alexandra Limon tells us if they have any chance of passing. And our polling on race relations in America. Politics Now.
You're watching Politics Now.
New insight on how Americans are responding to the nationwide Black Lives Matter protests. Joe Khalil from our Washington, D.C. bureau shows us how the public views race relations, protests, and the president.
After days of protest following the death of George Floyd, more than half of Americans say race relations haven't improved since the 1960s.
It was very surprising to see that a majority of people think that they're either the same or worse.
That's according to the Nexstar Emerson College poll released Wednesday. Spencer Kimball, polling director, says the poll shows clear signs of a divided nation.
Only 43% of the country said that they trust the police. Those are the people that we train our children to go speak to in case of a problem. That's something I think we have to address as a society.
Almost 46% of those polled approve of the protests, while nearly 38% disapprove. And on President Trump's handling of the situation, about 47% of Americans don't approve, compared to about 36% who support how the president responded to the death of George Floyd. Although Kimball says the president's response hasn't impacted his overall approval numbers.
Voters may be perturbed by some of his actions and activities, but at the end of the day, when they have to cast their ballot, they may still vote for him.
But there were a few points on which the vast majority of Americans agreed. About 90% of people say the officer who killed George Floyd should be prosecuted for it.
It cuts by party, by race, by age, by religion. Everybody is in agreement that what the officer did was wrong.
Kimball says if Americans are looking for a reason to be hopeful, a majority of respondents say they believe race relations will improve in the future. In Washington, I'm Joe Khalil.
Congress members say they are working on federal reforms to the American policing system to ensure justice for George Floyd and all Americans of color. Our Washington, D.C. correspondent Alexandra Limon reports that some lawmakers are pushing to pass bills on police brutality and racial profiling in the coming weeks.
Some lawmakers say now is the time for sweeping reform when it comes to police brutality and use of force.
George Floyd was the latest in a terrible history of modern-day lynchings where Americans are being killed simply for the color of their skin.
Leaders from the Black, Hispanic, Native American, and Asian Pacific American caucuses are demanding accountability for the death of George Floyd.
This injustice is not the case of a few bad cops, but a broken police system.
Democrats are pushing a resolution to condemn police brutality, racial profiling, and excessive use of force by police. And Texas Congressman Joaquin Castro says they want more changes.
We can end the excessive use of force by law enforcement and, for example, ban chokeholds.
Another proposal would require state and local governments to track police use of force and report it to the Justice Department. The data would be made public. Democrats say they believe the massive nationwide public call for change will lead to support from Republicans, who have also been vocal about Floyd's death.
We need to work to ensure that what happened last Monday in Minneapolis never happens again, and that the perpetrators of crimes like this one are held accountable.
California Representative Karen Bass, chair of the Black Caucus, says reforms should have real teeth.
If there was no enforceability, we would be wasting our time. This is the time to act, and it's the time to act in a substantial way.
Democrats hope to tackle the bills this month. In Washington, Alexandra Limon.
In addition to the proposals that you just mentioned, are there some other items that Democrats hope to tackle on Capitol Hill related in response to the George Floyd, his death?
Yeah, definitely. Democrats feel that they really need to seize this moment and kind of, use that public call for change that we've seen all around the country. So one additional piece of proposed legislation, for example, would ban the transfer of U.S. military equipment to police departments around the country. Democrats say that the streets around the country, main streets around the country, are not battlegrounds. Therefore, there's no reason for these police departments to have and use that military equipment. However, that's going to be one of the tougher pieces of legislation to get through the U.S. Senate, which is controlled by Republicans, because we've seen Democrats make pretty much that exact same argument for banning the sale of assault-style rifles to the general public, and it just hasn't worked so far.
There's also a timeline here. We've got the 4th of July holiday on the horizon here. There's a sense, I imagine, that Democrats kind of want to try and tackle some of these issues now while the issue is so much at the forefront of the American public. Is there a chance this is actually going to get to that level in time?
And that's exactly right. In fact, Democrats have pinmarked that 4th of July deadline as to the fact that they want to pass these bills and legislation before that date. And it might be possible to get some of these through the U.S. House by that deadline. However, getting any package and bill through the U.S. Senate by the 4th of July is going to be extremely tough. First of all, because it's unclear whether Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell would actually call any of these bills to the floor for a vote in the Senate at all. Now, keep in mind, at the same time, Congress is trying to put together a 5th legislative package to deal again with the economic fallout of the COVID-19 crisis. So trying to get Congress not only to pass 2 major pieces of legislation at the same time in about 4 weeks is going to be tough just because of the amount of work involved. But then you're also trying to get Democrats and Republicans to agree on these 2 major issues in such a short timeline. It's going to be incredibly difficult.